All right, welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Music Richmond. And of course, I'm your co-host, Bill McGee, and my stick man over here on the other side is Charles Mann.
Hello there.
And we've got one of Richmond's just best known, best people, music people who probably knows as much about music history as Charles and I do here from this Richmond area, because he's a large part of that music history. And as he likes to say, almost everybody who's come through Richmond at some point in time or another has played in his band. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles Mann, and he'll introduce you to our guest on this edition.
It is an absolute honor for me to introduce this gentleman. This gentleman has had an influence on the Richmond scene that has just probably surpassed just about everybody. He's crossed every line, not only as a saxophone musician, but as an instructor, as a jazz historian, as a leader in the community. He has just done so many things with his nonprofits and his authorship as an author. He has no idea how long I've admired him with the things he's done. He has no clue. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. James Plunky Branch.
Good evening, and I'm so honored to be here. I hope I can live up to my introduction, and it's my pleasure to talk to you this evening.
If you could just kind of put it all in a little quick. Who is James Plunky Branch? Where did you start, and how did you get involved in the music scene in Richmond?
Well, as already noted, I'm James Plunky Branch, saxophonist and leader of a group called Plunky and Oneness of Juju. I got my start in Richmond Public Schools, attending McGee Walker High School from 1962 to 1965 under the tutelage of Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy was a tremendous band instructor, and one of those many of the music instructors in the black community who were professional musicians, and sort of pointing the way and giving us an example of how to maintain a day job and also gig at night. And in Mr. Kennedy's case, he went traveling internationally during the summers to places like Japan as a jazz violinist, and then to return to Richmond and be one of the first two black members of the Richmond Symphony. So that's my heritage, the tremendous band instructors in the black community, Mr. Johnny Payton, Dave Williams, Poochie Ross, and others who gave us an example of how to be professional musicians, educators, and upstanding members of the community.
Plunky, you've got a long, deep-rooted history in the academic field of music in Richmond. So what made you continue to pursue that once you got out of high school?
Well, I thought I was going to be a chemist. I went to Columbia University in New York. I was recruited to go there as part of their efforts to get black students from the South to integrate their campus. And I thought I was going to Columbia to major in chemistry, having grown up on the South Side early in my life, and been near the DuPont factory, and they had a sign outside that said "Better things for better living through chemistry." And I thought that I could do something good for the world through chemistry. Now, music was always a second love of mine. But when I went to New York, I found myself immersed in a community of musicians. There was a great jazz, as everybody knows. New York had a tremendous jazz community, and being getting a chance to be in New York and see these wonderful jazz musicians really turned me on. That and the fact that at Columbia, I ran into a left-wing political situation with the students and faculty there, and I found out I really didn't want to be a chemist. I didn't want to make chemicals for, at the time, supplying the military-industrial complex and the Vietnam War. I started a band on campus, on Columbia's campus. The band was called the Soul Syndicate. Basically, I was in New York, duplicating the bands that I had grown up with in Richmond. All I did was go transplant the Richmond band experience, like all you guys were in, and I duplicated that on a white campus, and we were unique.
When did you first start playing an instrument, and what was your first instrument?
Like Charles, I started on the clarinet under the tutelage of Johnny Payton.
Oh.
Johnny Payton was my first band instructor at Maymont Elementary. I moved from the south side to the west end. I had started at Blackwell Elementary, and in the fourth grade, we all had tonettes or song flutes.
Song flute.
And they used that as kind of a screening mechanism. The people who showed some proficiency in that were recruited to go into the band in the fifth grade. And the instructors said, well, identified me as somebody who had some proficiency in that. And in the fifth grade, I took up the clarinet under the tutelage of Johnny Payton, junior high school, where Dave Williams was my instructor. And then Mr. Kennedy in Maggie Walker Senior High School.
How did your musicianship develop, and who were some of the people?
The first group that I was a part of was called Jackie and the Citation. And it was a group with Nelson Lawson and a lady, Jackie Peters.
Because you finished high school in '65 and left the area to go to Columbia, and then you spent some time on the West Coast also, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
You missed a period of time where the groups that a lot of people talk about in Richmond basically developed, which is Charles's group, Ujima, Chapter 7, the Hold On Family, Lil Walter. A lot of those people right there were developing during that time that you were gone.
That's absolutely.
So when you came back, these groups were already, Charles's group was already pretty much established as one of the top groups in the area. Do you remember what year you came back to the Richmond area?
I came back to Richmond in 1974.
In 74, we had already signed with CBS, and we were already out on the road in 74. We were gone by 75 for sure.
Right.
Doing tours and all that kind of stuff.
But see, Charles, that's the Plunky is filling a hole for you and I that we talked about because of the way that development went. When you left New York, you went west for, how long did you spend out west?
About 2.5, 3 years. Band that I formed on the West Coast, brought that band back to New York. It was an avant-garde African jazz band.
You were there in San Francisco, Oakland when the Bay Area funk was born.
Yeah,
I mean,
Sly Stone,
the Tower of Power, Sly Stone, and Carlos Santana, and Carlos, all of that stuff was born in that time when you were out there in that area.
Right.
Absolutely. I was there on that scene. I didn't play any of those people, but I was gigging around and freelancing until I got with an African band, an African musician from South Africa, Indiko Kaba.
So did you pick up your Afrocentristic interest at Columbia, and then it kind of blossomed when you went to Oakland? Because now the other thing about Oakland when you were there was the Black Power movement.
Absolutely.
And the Black Panthers were some serious.
Yeah, that's really, as I alluded to earlier, at Columbia, I got with and was indoctrinated into a very left-wing and then eventually Afrocentric or nationalist view, political view of the world, and took that with me to California. But it wasn't until I got with Indiko that I became Africanized, if you will, Africa from the continent.
You brought with you a representation of a culture. You were a philosopher of everything dealing with our people. I remember your branch of the art was the foundation. All of those things stood out about you as an educator.
Pan-Africa, in other words. Pan-Africa.
That had come from my experience, learning from his brother Indiko Kaba, the Zulu from South Africa. Studying under him basically gave me this philosophy. And this philosophy was that black music and black people are all of African descent, one. And number two, that music had a certain characteristic Whether we're talking about traditional African music or modern black music from this country, there was rhythm or polyrhythm, there was emotion, feeling. The idea of soul is using energy in the music and not just mentally, but investing yourself emotionally in the music. And the improvisation is always a part of it, Charles, whether we're talking about church music or rhythm and blues music or jazz music, improvisation is a part of it. And then this last factor, and this is the part that you're alluding to, even though you might not articulate it in the same way, the idea that the music should be judged not by what you're playing, but how, and the impact that the music has on your community. So that was what the brother impressed on me, that if you're going to try to do something with music, in order for it to be meaningful in the African sense, was that it had to pay homage to your ancestors, and it had to be doing something positive for the community. And so, Charles, what you recognized, what you saw, was not something that came from within Plunky, but something that I learned from my elders. And so, and let me just put a footnote, and that is, what I've found, remember I told you earlier, when I went to New York, I took a piece of Richmond music heritage with me and formed a Richmond type band in the North. When I went from New York to San Francisco and then from San Francisco back, I learned a lot about arts and culture and politics. And what I learned, I brought back to Richmond. So I have been kind of a cultural ambassador wherever I go, sharing sort of the best. I don't invent these things, so I don't take a whole bunch of pride as if I'm some guru or something. I'm simply sharing what's been imparted to me, and I think that's my job. My job is to take the best of what I find in these places and bring them to where I'm going to be, and that place for the last 40, 50 years has been back in Richmond. And so I've been sharing, when I told you I was in New York and in the loft jazz scene, I met people like Ornette Coleman. But Ornette Coleman put me in charge of running his gallery and his performance space while he went off to North Africa. Well, when I came back to Richmond, I created a gallery and performance space in my house on Church Hill. And later we did a building called the Branch Center on Clay Street, where we did those same kinds of programming. Again, Plunky didn't invent it. He learned that from Ornette, saw what could work, what could be positive for the community, and that was my job. I still think that's my job. That's what I'm here to do.
Your cultural ambassadorship was, as some people like to say, as some people have the natural gift of teaching. And in all of your performances that I've ever seen for the last almost 50 years, you always attempt to teach your audience something about black music.
That's what I learned from my elders. That's what I saw in my mother. That's what I saw from Indico. Every time he went on stage, he was teaching people about what was going on in Africa.
Well, what makes that so beautiful is what Charles was directly pointing out. And what you are saying, you teaching some young people and enlightening or reminding some old people, but you also broadening the scope of people who have no idea about what you were speaking of, and had it not been for you, they would have never known some of these things. If you're the only exposure people have ever had to anything close to African music, what you have done is broaden people's horizons who without you would still be either ill-informed, misinformed, or uninformed.
You are a cultural guru. You are an instructor of wisdom in your performances. And it's not just playing the music. It's all about educating people in front of you listening to the music.
I really appreciate that I'm often said about myself, I'm sort of like a black Forrest Gump, because in that movie, Forrest Gump ends up at these world important events. I didn't set out to do these things. The circumstances brought me to Indico. And then the circumstances brought me back to New York and work with Ornette and Pharoah Sanders and world important figures. Then I had the chance later to travel to Africa. You know, I was studying African music in San Francisco and studying jazz music back in New York. I had a chance to go to Africa not once, but 6 or 7 times. I met all these world important musicians. I jammed with Fela. I met Hugh Masekela. I performed with Pharoah Sanders, who would perform with John Coltrane. You know, things like this I didn't plan, but I'm grateful. And then I think, as I cannot overstate, I just think it's my job. It's what
we all have benefited from your
exposures
and your experiences. We've all benefited from that, as Bill said, because what it does, it has informed and educated people the whole time just watching you perform and listening to you. Because as you perform, you're a storyteller. You are a cultural enlightener to many folks, and you've done that consistently over the years. For a moment, let me go to your branches of the arts.
Yes.
Tell me what made you get that started.
When I came back to Richmond and we started this art gallery and art center in our house, one of the things we struggled with was trying to get funding. And we learned that there were things called grants that you could write and get grant money to sustain the arts and culture. But we ran up into this problem, and that was that most monies were not given to Black organizations. So we had to, overcome the legal barrier that most people give monies to what they call a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, which meant we have to incorporate, register with the government, and say we're going to do these educational things and thereby be eligible for people to make donations to us or for us to write grants. In that experience, we found that there was government money that was available to nonprofit organizations, but most of those monies, if not all of it, went to the established white organizations. We engaged a very energetic, if not controversial, attorney, Saad El-Amin, and we challenged the state of Virginia's Virginia Commission for the Arts, such that we said we would create a class action suit to say that Black people were not getting our share of the tax dollars, that because we were putting some dollars in, some money should come back to our community. And we were able to get some funds earmarked, even though it couldn't be said that it was earmarked racially, earmarked toward smaller organizations. Then out of that experience, we put together a group of organizations, of sub-organizations like Labland and the Volunteer Choir, the Soweto Stage Company. We formed an organization called the Richmond Jazz Society. This set up a kind of an interesting dynamic. It might have been considered weird, but on the one hand, you had the white corporate structure, because Richmond had, and still has, but at that time it had a very large Fortune 500. We had maybe 7 or 8 of the 500 largest companies in the country based in Richmond. And so Federated Arts Council had these rich and powerful, largely white people running the corporate world, but Black people running the political world. And so again, I'm going to make this very short. The Federated Arts Council was in a unique position by joining forces with branches of the arts. It allowed Henry Marsh and Chuck Richardson and Willie Dell and that group of 5 Black people who would control the city government. It was through the arts that they found a way to work with the white power structure. When we did things like June Jubilee, or Charles, you mentioned our Dogwood Dell concerts, annual concerts. When that started, there have been maybe 20 years that Dogwood Dell have been there. They were still playing Dixie at the Dogwood Dell. Black people could go, but did not go because they were playing Dixie at the.
It wasn't for us. It wasn't for us.
It wasn't for us.
We were not invited to Bird Park at all.
At all. So when branches came about, we were able to get a gig for Plunky and Oneness of Juju and Larry Bland and the Volunteer Choir. Those initial performances there. At first, they didn't even let us in the bowl. They would put us on the side of the carillon looking over this long
I
lawn.
remember.
They wouldn't put us in the bowl. But when we finally got in the bowl, it was a situation like the Armstrong Walker game. For people who are watching this, they might not know that for years and years, there were only 2 black high schools in Richmond. And so when we had an Armstrong Walker game the Saturday after Thanksgiving every year, it was the biggest event. Sometimes, and I'm not exaggerating, it was the largest sporting event in the state of Virginia, larger than
correct.
the college games, because every black person in Richmond had to have gone to one of those schools. So it was like an alumni reunion. Well, in some ways, the performances at Dogwood Dell with Plunky and Oneness and Larry Bland and Volunteer Choir were like that, because they were the only 2 times that black people would be invited to come to Dogwood Dell.
That's right.
So every black person might come. We had audiences there of 10, 11, and 12,000 people at Dogwood Dell. It was only set up to hold 3,000.
You definitely helped break the ice in Richmond in the arts community.
Yeah.
There was no representation of black art at all, or acknowledgement, I should say, of black art at all prior to you and your efforts. What you and of course with Larry, with the June Jubilee or the Arts Council, all of those things at large. I know you've been acknowledged by several folks, particularly in recent years. They're beginning to give you some credit for the things that you've done, but I don't think enough credit because I know the struggle. I know how tough it was, because I know it's not just about you playing music. You're not just a musician. You are an educator. You have helped a lot of folks in becoming aware of their own identity.
But Charles, one of the things that I've done that shows you what you just said is, one of the things that I would do with the grandkids is whenever Plunky was at Dogwood Dell, it'd be so crowded, like he said, man, that it was crazy. But I would take them and we'd pull up and we'd go to the side of the stage and we'd come down and I'd show them what Plunky and what this performance looked like. They were young and their attention span couldn't take it. But I wanted them to feel and to see and to be there.
Well, okay, let me tell you, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is truly, it's an honor. It's an honor to work with you over the years, to watch you over the years, to learn from you over the years. It's been an absolute honor to have you today to talk with us.
Thank you, Charles and Bill. Thank you so much.
Bill and I are on this mission right now of trying to reach back to 60s and 70s and 80s when live bands were the thing in Richmond.
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to be there with it. And some guys before us and a few guys after us, we were lucky to be right in the middle of it all. And you were definitely one that stand out. And we would not be complete without a conversation with you.
I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Honor that you accepted the invitation and that you're here to speak with us. And Bill, you got a closing statement?
Yeah, thinking about Plunky and what you said earlier is on our journey to tie this whole thing in, his traveling, his mission, his gift, his calling is probably more unique or as unique as anybody else we're going to interview this whole time. Right. Because most of the guys that you and I are thinking about are traditional R&B people or traditional gospel, whatever people that we'll be interviewing. But Plunky, I was just listening to you and I was just reflecting on the fact that all of the pieces fell together to make you, to allow you to spread this knowledge that your intellect and your ability and your desire to want to be a chemist, your mother who is such well known. I mean, anybody from the West End, everybody I talk to from the West End talk about being Miss Branch class.
Yeah, Miss Branch class. That's right.
They talk. Everybody from the West End talks about your mother, like she was a staple. If you came up in the West End, you wanted Miss Branch's class, you just don't measure up. Because everybody who came through the West End and was somebody had your mother for their teacher.
Yeah.
And then for that, your influences, and we're not gonna leave out Muzi either.
No, please.
Oh, no, not at all.
We're not gonna leave out
the real Renaissance man of the family.
Yeah, we can't leave Muzi out. We can't leave Kyrie out either.
Yeah.
No, can't leave Kyrie out. No.
And leave Kyrie out. Kyrie and Muzi.
We're going to look for another opportunity to bring them in as well.
Yeah, we'll have to bring them in.
Because, we're not done. We're not done. Yeah. We're just getting started.
But just to think again about, I was reflecting, I was saying, well, it's interesting how in a spiritual way, we say, order my steps.
Mm-hmm.
And your steps have been ordered.
No doubt.
Right.
No doubt.
Right? Your steps were ordered.
Yeah.
You went to where you had to go to pick up what you needed to pick up, to bring it back, to share it.
Bring that meal around. That's what you did.
See that Shaker Ray over there?
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now.
No, you're not the only person to say that, Bill. People tell me I was in elementary school in Mosby Middle School, and I'll never forget. You brought the Shaker Ray and you shook that thing on stage. You could flip it and blah. No, I understand. I understand the impact of what we have done, but it is through a steps being ordered. That is such a great metaphor. My steps have been ordered. I have stepped in some things.
I know
things that are just, from
but I want
records to Black Fire Records. I mean, know that, or Gil Scott Heron, or touring with Masakila, and then Asante. It goes on and on. So my steps have been ordered, no doubt.
But closing, I want to thank you for listening and following your calling. I'm also speaking in a more personal sense of all the people that I know who have been influenced by your passion and your commitment to following the steps which were ordered for you through the great creator, or whatever way people want to use it. You were sent on a mission to go and gather this knowledge and bring it back and share it with these people. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for doing that.
My great pleasure. If I have one talent, it's the talent of being dedicated and having a stick to itness, a perseverance. That's probably my biggest skill. That if there's something I would share with younger musicians, if you find your calling, if you find something you can dedicate yourself to and persevere, really, really pursue it with all your heart and mind and soul and body, perhaps you'll get a payday. But the payday doesn't necessarily have to come in monetary terms. It can come in terms of respect. It can come in terms of lives you influence, positive
touch
effects that you have on other people. That can be your pay. And so I urge people to go out and find that.
Well, and I thank you, and I thank Charles. And to piggyback on what you just said about any young people watching, what I would share with them is that the three of us being on here is that we decided at a young age, probably before we were 15, 16 years old, that this is what we wanted to do.
Sure.
And now, 50, 60 years later, we're still doing what we wanted to do.
What we're here to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And that is what puts a smile on my face.
Yeah.
That the three of us, even though we're sitting here talking like a bunch of old men,
right,
we're still doing. And I tell kids this, Charles, in particular. I teach at Virginia State, and I tell my students there, I said, you don't seem to understand something. Because of the technology, like we're on this Zoom right here, and because of all the stuff that we can do at home, Plunky and Charles, with our technology.
Yeah.
I said, you don't understand something. I feel 18 years old.
Yeah.
I said, had I had all of this when I was 18, God knows passion and perseverance.
Yeah.
That's what the three of us have in common more than anything else.
I love it.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for this entire conversation.
Thank you so much,
I
guys.
look forward to reaching out again to you as we move along. Sometime in the spring, I'm hoping that we can get a live, COVID be behind us, and we can all get together for at least one day and do a 50-year-old handshake.
Right.
You know what I mean?
We deserve that.
That's the idea. Thank you,
my
man.
brother. Y'all be
Guys, have a good evening.
Peace and love through me. Y'all take care.